Hey folks, and welcome to this bonus video in the Profile Builder series on reverse engineering. Now, I'm not talking about reverse engineering code here, I'm talking about reverse engineering profiles. So maybe you're not starting from scratch, but you already have an existing profile that you've built and you want to start maintaining it with the Profile Builder. So what can we reverse engineer? Let's find out. Let's create a new Profile Builder project. I'm going to call it UAF Builder because I'm going to reverse engineer from the UAF profile which ships with Rhapsody. Let's start by adding that profile into this model. But I won't use add profile to model, that would add it read-only. Instead, I'll use add to model, and I'll select the UAF SPSX file, that's the profile. And then the really important part is here. I'm going to load this as an editable reference. That is, load it as a unit, but don't copy it. Leave it where it is on the file system. Now let's see what stereotypes are in that profile. To do that, I'll add a new stereotype table to my Profile Builder package. Now I will need to change the scope of that table because by default it's set to the owner of the table, which is the Profile Builder package. Let's change that to point at the UAF profile. Now I can double click that table to open it. Now that of course will take a few seconds to populate here as that profile is quite large. There are in fact 453 stereotypes in it. Now, of course, I could have separate tables for each sub-package, as that profile is quite well structured. Let's add another table. This time, we'll add a stereotype constraints table. Now, once again, I'll change the scope of the table. This time, maybe let's set it to one of the sub-packages in that profile. Let's maybe select that first one. That has all of the operational terms in it. If I then open that table, there we can see that the UAF profile has made extensive use of constraints. So let's reverse engineer some of the other elements that come with the UAF profile, starting with properties. Now we already know we can import those. We've imported from the factory PRP file multiple times in this video series. Now there we used a property library since we wanted to filter the import. This time we'll just use a property file because we want to import the entire thing. We don't need to apply any filters. Let's create a new property file. I'll just call that one simply root. And then I can right click it and select Profile Builder Import Property File. And I'll browse to the UAF folder and there I can select the UAF PRP file. Now, by the way, if your property files use includes, then there is a tag that you can set on the property file here in the model to make sure any included PRP files are also reverse engineered, also imported. Next, I'll add a properties table just to make it easier to see what properties the UAF has. And there we can see some of those are overriding the Rhapsody factory properties, but others are for some of the automation that comes with the UAF. Now note that some of these properties are enumerated types, and when those are imported, the Profile Builder even creates types for them to make it much easier to select a new value. Now if I were to make this the root file for the UAF profile, then I could generate this property file at any time. I can now maintain it right here in the model. Next, let's reverse engineer and add new menu. Now, add new menus are typically defined on a stereotype like this one, the project level UAF stereotype. If we take a look at the properties for that stereotype, there we can see the add new menu structure property that contains the custom menu. To maintain that, we need a model of it. Let's add a new add new menu builder. Let's call that UAF root menu. And then we can add an add new menu diagram to make it easier to do things graphically. And on that diagram, we can create a new add new menu. Again, I'll call it UAF root menu. Next, I'll drag on the stereotype that has the menu I want to reverse engineer, that project level UAF stereotype. Then I'll connect it to the Add New menu with an Applies To connection, just as if I were modelling this from scratch. But I'm not modelling this from scratch. In this case, I'm going to right-click that Add New menu, and I'm going to select Create Model from Add New menu. Now, believe it or not, that has now built that menu as a model. If I locate this Add New menu in the model browser, there we can see it has lots of submenus. It's quite a large menu. If I want to visualize this graphically, then I can. I can use the standard Rhapsody option to populate the diagram. So this will add any other model elements related to or from this one. So there are those submenus. Now if I want to, I can choose which one of those to maybe further elaborate on this diagram. Now for large menus like this one, I typically do that on separate diagrams, just to keep things tidy and readable. Next, helper files. If you have your own automation as part of your profile, then you would have also written helper files, or HEP files, to have Rhapsody load them up. Now, I haven't created a video on helper files yet, but it is part of the standard hands-on workshop. We can model them, we can generate them, and we can reverse engineer them. Let's add a new helper file and call that one UAF helpers. And then I'll select Profile Builder, Import Helper File. Now I can browse to the UAF folder, and there we'll find a UAF.hep file that UAF uses to load its automation helpers. We'll select that, we'll click Open. Now if I expand that out in the model browser, we can see the plugins and we can see the menu entries that the user sees in Rhapsody, all of the content that was in that HEP file. Now just like property files, we can now maintain this HEP file right here in the model, and we can generate it back onto the file system whenever we like. Having a model makes it really easy to do things like reordering the helper menu entries, something that is virtually impossible to do by hand. Lastly, guide me's. Now it's not as likely that you will have written these by hand, but if you have, or you want to take an existing one and use it as the basis for a new one, then we can reverse engineer it. Let's start by adding a new guide me package. And then I'll add a new empty guide me. But rather than designing this one manually, I'm going to right-click it and select Import Guide Me. Let's browse to the Rhapsody installation, and we'll select one of the out-of-the-box guide me's that ship with Rhapsody. Let's choose an interesting looking one. How about model-based testing? So there are all of the steps in that guide me. If I open the features for the first one and we look at its description, there we can see we've even brought any formatting that was in that guide me XML file. We've also brought in the skippable notations. We've brought in the sub-steps, even actions. This one had an open model action in it. So now we have a model of the guide me. Again, we can maintain it here and generate it whenever we need to. Well, that's it for this video. If you have an existing profile, then it is really easy to reverse engineer it and start maintaining it using the Profile Builder.